Today we're going to be talking about the movie The Inspection. And The Inspection is a 2022 American drama film written and directed by Elegant Bratton. Hope I said that correctly. It's also inspired by the real life experiences of his experience basically in the Navy and in the Marine Corps. And I'm very happy that both of you, took the time to be here. And
Dr. Rob Berkeley is an activist and managing editor of BlkOutUK, which is a creative collective of Black, bisexual, gay, and or trans men. Patrick is an ex-Royal Navy officer, and today he is the head of communications for Hague Housing.
I'm very happy that both of you, took the time to be here, and let's just get right into it and talk about the movie. So what do you think about the movie?
I think it's a brilliant movie for myself. There have been a few, not that many movies which have covered both sides of the Atlantic, the military service and being LGBT, but this one is different. It has a very visceral story, and I've come out of it feeling that low budget as it might have been, this was a really brilliant bit of cinematography. I was amazed by the acting. It was excellently cast with people who really could get across their personalities, those of the characters involved. And although I'm British, ex-Royal Navy, I have some American blood, and I have connections into the US Marine Corps through family cousins, and it's very accurate in its way about how it conveys some of the central themes within the movie. I'll say enough there for the moment.
And I concur. I think it was a really powerful movie. I'm a big fan of Elegance's work, and the story that is unconventional. It's not what you expect. It's not a tale of. It's a tale of challenge, but it's not necessarily a tale of woe. And the relationship between mother and son is a crucial part of the film. I think it's the driver of most of the action. So kudos to Elegance and the team, and Jeremy Pope and Gabrielle Union. It's a very good film.
It is a very good film, I agree. And my understanding of this movie and the way I've received this movie is I see it as a love letter that Elegance wrote to his mom. And unfortunately, his mom passed away before he got picked up or something like that. So this is a beautifully sad story about unconditional love, that bond between the mother and child through, but very not how do you say it? It's not an easy one considering the sexuality of the child, the man, and
but it came through, didn't it? In the end, she was there, and in many ways, whatever the sort of challenges that sort of Elegance faced when he was a rookie, a new Marine, a grunt, going through basic training, for all that, the person who actually changed the most, Elegance, playing the character Ellis French, stayed true to who he was, but it was his mother who was challenged. And in fairness to her, as difficult as it was, given her own personal circumstances, her own upbringing, her own beliefs, and so on, despite all those years when he wasn't at home, leaving at I think 16.
She kicked him out.
Yeah. Despite all of that, when he had actually made something of his life, he was no longer homeless. He had earned his own self-respect, and critically, that of his fellow Marines, and that's a key thing, because ultimately, in the really good military, doesn't matter whether there's a ban on being LGBT at the time, or this halfway house which the American military had at this time called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, what's really important, and those who are trained to be really good Marines or soldiers, and it doesn't matter whether you're a pacifist or you understand the concept of having a military, it's the human thing. And what they found was that he became one of them. He was someone who would be there for them. And in the end, despite all the sort of the hazing as projected, he came through, and he came through on his feet, and they recognized him for what he was, not a gay man, but as a fellow Marine coming out of training. And so that's another key message in itself. And, you know, I think I told one of you when I met you one previous time, when we actually saw this film for the first time, that in the days when we were fighting to get the ban on LGBT personnel in the British military lifted, I was on I think it was breakfast show on Radio 5, and we had one of the commanding officers of one of the battalions of the parachute regiment there, and he kept fairly quiet during the program and was eventually poked enough by the sort of the host of the program to actually say something, and what he said was quite profound, because it actually mirrors what one of the main lessons out of this movie. And this was as follows. He said, if I found myself in the front line as the colonel of my battalion, and we were in a pretty tough situation, we were in dugouts on the front line, and I had a choice of two marksmen, markspeople, not quite certain what we call them these days, marksmen or markswomen, and to be with me, and one of them was a bigot, and the other one was a gay man, I know who I'd always choose. I'd choose the gay man because he was as good as marksman as the other, but I'd trust his judgment more. And so what he was trying to say with that was, we don't give a stuff, really, so long as you can do your job. But if I've got a choice, I'll take the person who's not, now I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this word, but as we would say in the military, who's not a shit, who's, I'll take the decent person who's got a bit of morality to him. So I've never forgotten that, and in a way I saw that coming through. That I think there was one role which was sort of part sort of written or dramatized for the film. About one of the drill instructors, there was a slight question mark of, was there an LGBT element to him as well? And I think it was called, I've written it down, Raul Castillo.
Yes,
and
that's correct.
That was very interesting, because he came across as a very decent person as well.
And I saw the movie like 3 times because I wanted to know if he was like of the persuasion, but I couldn't tell. But
I don't think you were meant to. And that was part of the brilliance of the film that Elegance has put together here, that he's left that little question mark. And do you know what? It doesn't matter. And that's perhaps what he was trying to get across. And right towards the end, when they'd had the sort of the inspection, and they were having, they were having their celebration afterwards. I can tell you a bit about that in a second. And there was sort of, a lot was going through the mother's mind at that time. I think she'd come out of the car, she'd gone in, and she realized that actually she was welcome there as the mother of one of their brothers. It was as simple as that. And I think that made her think, you can challenge people in a safe and secure way.
Absolutely. I think there's a number of themes that bounce around in this film, but the halfway house of the policy, don't ask, don't tell, I think meant that they couldn't have a conversation about whether the drill sergeant was shared a minority sexuality with the protagonist, because they're not allowed to ask or tell. So in some ways, I'm pleased that it was a a marker in terms of progress, but actually I'm quite pleased that they abandoned that as a policy, because it strikes me as something which stops you from being your full self, or able to support each other.
Who actually removed it from the American military? United States' first black president, and I wonder if he has, with his family, seen this film. It should be brought to his attention, because I think he would identify very much with it and know that he actually helped all of this along further. In fairness to Clinton, he tried to get there, but his Joint Chiefs of Staff, so the chiefs of the Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, and also the Coast Guard, after he'd announced that he intended to lift the ban, weren't having anything of it in his early days, his first sort of week or two. And so this was the best fudge that he could come up with. And I'm glad that it's gone. And aspects of that almost came back under Trump, particularly with our trans brothers and sisters. There are still issues in America which are having to be, tackled by their support organizations. Can I say one other thing? I mean, it's such a fabulous film. We know that he worked hard at getting the budgeting together. He was able to assemble a superlative cast of actors. And I don't want to detract from film at all. So if you put it in the perspective of a really great play performed out on a stage, you all know that around you, the set that you have is not reality. If it's a comedy or something like that, normally a set with lots of doors and people going in and out and sort of things being hurtled around the place and balconies and so on. And you've seen The Lion King. It's so beautifully staged, with almost sort of semi-cartoon type characters featuring the beautiful headdresses, featuring the key all the various animals, the actors for that. This was a film which had to be made without an enormous budget. So the reality is that where this group of Marines would have undertaken their basic training would have actually been in one part of an enormous modern camp. And somewhere like Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, for instance. And the barrack blocks would have been basic but modern. And the inspection would have been quite a spectacle. And so they had he made the best of a limited budget, and I thought of it very much as, represented as if that stage play, that it didn't actually matter what was around because it was all about the people and the story. But what I would like to see, and what I would very much like to see with Elegance as the director, is this made with a proper budget, and to see how that would look. That would be incredibly powerful. And that's just a personal thing. You might think that by setting it, in a much larger environment and so on, that it might lose the personal touch. But actually, I don't think it would. And it, in a sense, I wish no one. I'm sad that no one has come forward and said, "Crikey, I've seen this film which you have made, and I'd like to actually finance it." For you.
I think,
and he might say, "No, I'm happy with this one. Finance my other film." And
completely, and I think Elegance would. Listening to him talk about the genesis of this, he wrote 3 scripts during the pandemic, and asked his partner and producer Chester, who should which of these he should produce first, and decided on this one. So we've got some more to come from him, which I think is good news.
He's got a big fan in me. I would like it to be taken up by one of the main channels here so that it gets a wider audience. I think it would go down exceptionally well. I used to have contacts into the TV world, but I'm, you know, I may try and bring it to the attention of a few people, but it's really difficult getting, you know, a film position. However, with Channel 4 and Channel 5, they like to be a little bit experimental still, and this is a film of complete caliber. So they wouldn't do wrong if they showed it.
That's very true, very right. You've both made such amazing points about the movie and the characterization and all of that. I wanted to also ask about the motivation of Ellis, played by Jeremy Pope. Like, what do you think was the motivation behind him wanting to be in the Navy?
Well, now, if this was being watched in America, you would have your knuckles wrapped, not your rockles, because the Americans are a little bit different from us. So just to explain, over here, the Marines, the Royal Marines, are part of the Royal Navy, but in America, they're a separate service. It's just they can't go anywhere without the United States Navy to carry them there. So, you know, just to sort of to tease you a little bit on that. A number of things. This is still a young man who's had a tough life. He's been homeless for a long period of time, and he's had a belief in himself. And he's come good, and he came into the Marines where he developed, interestingly, you know, a career in filmmaking. I think he made sort of short features and videos and so on. I'd love to see some of those. They'll probably be a lot more sort of you know, down to earth and so on. And he has a story to tell. This is an interesting time. Don't ask, don't tell. U.S. Marine Corps. Pretty tough lot. They're not the Rangers. They're not the you know, the CBBs. They're not Special Forces, but they're a pretty tough lot. And a lot of their people do go into the Special Forces in later in their career. So the story of how he came through during this period, where you had to, you know, don't tell and we won't ask, is an interesting one. How it actually is also a story about a son's love for his mother. A son's love for his mother never really, you know, there's a link always, whatever happens. And as you grow up, you're the one who've got the broad shoulders, not your mum. Actually, whatever life and path, you know, she's been taken down, the way she's formed her own belief structure and so on. And so I really like it that this is an ode to her. You know, this is a love note to his mother saying, Mum, you know, I got there, you got there. Hey, look at me now. Haven't you done well? And so that is very much part of it.
The motivation was for him to sort of get his mom's approval.
Yeah,
and I think to me, what this is a really powerful example of generational trauma. So you've got somebody who, in the mother, is a teenage, gets pregnant as a teenager, brings up a son. She's a very proud woman, who was very keen to be respected, and so her disappointment at her son's coming out is about how others perceive her son, and that almost a kind of shame around her honor and around her respectability. And for me, that's a pattern that happens way too often. I wouldn't kind of, this isn't an example of how to parent, right? This isn't she isn't presented as some kind of paragon. She is a human with all her flaws. And when she actually kicks her son out and leaves him to be homeless for a decade, then that is that is. I mean, and the ability of the son to forgive and to stay connected to his mother, I think, is testament to the realities of our lives, rather than the moment of cancellation or being thrown out and then people disappear. No, actually, we stay in each other's lives, but we muddle through some of those difficulties and challenges in relationships if those relationships are important to us.
Very correct. I feel like Gabrielle, she was the character. I think her name is Inez, and she was a very proud woman, and she saw her son as an extension of herself, and Ellis not being the kind of man that she wanted him to be. I feel like she saw it as a failure on her part, and so she couldn't just deal with him being around her, because she just felt like she failed at that part, and him getting into the Navy, Royal Military, and just being able to pass, like, she was proud. But I don't know if you noticed, Patrick, but it was a conditional love that she had for him. Like, it was dependent on him being like a straight man and finally representing as the kind of man that she was hoping he would be. And even despite the journey he'd been on, like, she was still holding on to that. And then I was watching something recently where someone spoke about love, like a description of love, and they said love is when you're patient with someone as they try to change. Now, his mom, Ellis, was patient and is going to be patient and will forever be patient. Unfortunately, she passed away, but his goal was he's going to be patient for his mom, and he's going to love her until she changes and finally accepts him. And I just wanted to point that out quickly.
That is portrayed very well, and people don't change overnight. It would have been a journey for her, and it may have been a journey where, that she continued for the rest of her life. But you've put it so well that through his actions, his courage, but also her courage as well, they were both able to arrive at a situation where she, still not perhaps quite understanding it, still feeling that it went against her own principles and so on, could see her son as someone who others respected, who had achieved something through his own endeavor. Her son. And for all that he might be a fallen sort of figure and a black sheep and all the rest of it, in the sense of being the odd one out, for all that, she had, as you said, met some of her expectations. Not all of them, and perhaps that would never change. I really wanted to know more at the end of the film, and that this is a thing with many films about what happened to the characters, and so on. If there were ever a re-edit, I don't know if you've seen one of George Lucas's early films before Star Wars, and it was called American Graffiti, and it's a fabulous film set, I think, in the late 50s, about a group of sort of, teens in, American teens, I think it was in Florida, actually, who sort of, hang about and, they got their cars and they can't really drink, but they try to, they hang out together, they rush around in their cars. And right at the end, I mean, it's a brilliant film, well worth digging at. Right at the end, there's quite a long period when each of the characters comes up, and it tells the story of what happened to them. This one, became a Marine and was killed in Vietnam. This one became a record producer. This one was killed in a car accident, whatever. And in a way, I mean, it was actually quite poignant. And so it answers some questions of what happened to all those happy, beautiful, mischievous people. And now you know. And sometimes, what it taught you was that in some instances, one character who was terribly popular, he did lose his life, I think, in Vietnam. And actually, you suddenly realise I didn't want to know that, but that's life. So,
I think it's interesting that you should, you should suggest that. I mean, I think if you were to watch Pier Kids, which is Elegance's documentary about the 10 years he spent living on the pier in New York, you'd get a real sense of some of the characters that he met there along the way, but also the lack of resolution, right? Because obviously it was a period. I mean, people who are homeless living on the piers of New York are not don't have a massively long life expectancy anyway. But some of the kind of tragedy that he saw in that 10 years, which actually doesn't come through in this film quite as clearly. But the notion that there should be closure maybe goes against that kind of idea of constantly developing relationship that he had with his mother.
Good point.
So rather than say it was all resolved and they lived happily ever after, actually it was pretty clear that happily ever after wasn't an option. They were going to keep on working at something.
Yeah. Well, I think we need more content around and then what happens. But I think it's because Black queerness, the exploration of Black queerness in cinema or on TV is still so new that it's like the origin story that we're still sort of exploring. And unlike if it was a white cast or even TV series or there's always a lot of the time, at least in my experience, some of the content around that's not Black queerness, it sort of shows and then like their lives after coming out, their lives after whatever situation. We get to see more of their lives, but with Black queerness, it's always that intro, and I feel like that's where we need to go now. That's what Black cinema, queer cinema, needs to explore more of. And I think,
I agree. I mean, it would be wonderful to see more stories. Full stop. But some stories that also included people growing old.
Yeah, I think
we're very much kind of stuck in that kind of development period, or that period around youth, and very rarely do we see somebody in their older years.
Yeah, so I think Pose is the only TV show or only content that has ever explored there and then, because they came out and they're on the street, and then what are they trying to make of their life? So that's why it was really phenomenal when it came out, because we're getting to see the diversity in queerness and Black queerness and all in all shades and colors, and it was just beautiful and it was new and it was fresh. So we need more content like that. And that's also something I was also going to mention. So obviously we know Ellis went in there to find his mother's love, but he came out of there finding his self-respect for himself, and that's also something that I love to see and that I enjoy to see. What moments stood out for you in the movie?
Good. There were many. Obviously, I think the moment when you could see in the mother's face the sort of the doubt, the confusion in her own mind about her previous thoughts about her son, and seeing him. So we're talking about towards the end of the film, the graduation, the inspection, and actually coming into the sort of the canteen, in the closing stages. I think that was sort of was important. Something which Elegance brought out, and I think I read that as himself, he didn't experience too much of it, which was a good thing, but I think it was important within the film to bring out that hazing did happen in those situations. And of course, you need to understand the why of it. And it's normally around young men's insecurity, their sort of masculinity, or at least what they've been told. And often the lack of good role models, or, overemphasis of things which we wouldn't agree with within either the parental or the societal sort of background, and so on. You know, they are the product of what they are and will react in that way as young men until it's challenged, until, you know, one of them actually starts to stand out as a bully, and others are actually sort of beginning to look back and think, is that me really? Seeing, you know, another side. And of course, the more mature character of, you know, played, I can't remember if it was his name or the actor, Raul Castillo, that's very subtly brought out. And that nuance about, with a question mark just left there. And of course, later realizing they didn't matter, you know, either way. It was about something else. It was about an older man who was in a position of authority. First of all, not abusing that authority, but also giving encouragement to someone who was in an understandably difficult predicament, but who had shown, you know, endurance and perseverance, all those things which actually they want to extract or to embed within a young recruit who is joining the United States Marine Corps. So really those two different areas. I think there was that time when I think he'd come across him one evening in the sort of and they chatted. That was the moment when I thought there is a projection of a good man. It doesn't actually matter a fig, you know, whether there's any nuance here or not. That's actually me being naughty, thinking that as a gay man probably. The reality was that something else was play there, that here was some integrity, someone who you could actually trust.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the scene of the film that I reflected on most since was the subway journey from New York, from the pier back to his mother, to announce to her that he was going to join the Marines. And the world in which he had immersed himself, which enabled him to see that there was another gay person on a carriage with him, and a trans person, and the looks that they were giving, and in some ways it was kind of here's a world into which he had moved outside of his parents or outside of his mother's kind of world experience. And then he went back to her and said, "I'm going to do something which you will respect," and that for me kind of summed up their relationship, and actually kind of resonated with some of the relationships I see between mothers and sons, which are about emergence. They're about saying, I want to do things, mother, that you approve of, but I also want to be myself, and that kind of tension that we deal with.
Yeah. One of my cousins, once removed, so my sort of parents' generation, was a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, long since not with us, but I met him when I was out with the Royal Navy in Wilmington in North Carolina. Crikey, in the mid-'80s, about 86. And I can remember we'd arrived in Wilmington on the evening that Prince Andrew was getting married to Fergie. So we'd actually got a cake on board, which had been made by the same chefs who'd made their wedding cake, because our petty officer chef knew someone in that baking team. And so we held a royal wedding reception on board the ship in Wilmington. It was a beautiful evening. I've got photographs, you know, of my my cousin. I looked upon him as an uncle, you know, in his white sort of summer, you know, DJ with all the sort of medals and bits and pieces. And he had been the first young officer ashore at Guadalcanal, which was a pretty ferocious sort of battle during the Second World War, as the Marine Corps, almost exclusively with the United States Navy and the Royal Navy, we had the Pacific Fleet out giving a lot of support, fought their way across towards what the Japanese call their home islands. And he's not around, and I can't put words into his mouth, but he was a really good individual, and I would have had no doubt that if he'd been around to see this film, he would have said at some point, "That's the sort of person we might like in the U.S. Marine Corps." As simple as that, and it does credit to the U.S. Marine Corps. It does credit to the individual, does credit to his mother, and there's many different things different people can take away from that film.
So outside of Ellis's sexual journey or experience in that place, there was also the character that was a Muslim. Like, do you have any remember how he couldn't really practice his religion because everything was sort of in a church, and he was sort of having to deal with also the fact that he was Asian, and there was the whole racial undertone of that was going on at the time. So, like, what is your experience of that, or can you speak to that? Or
I mean, to me, I think that character is there to highlight the way in which queer people open up spaces for others. So being different helps other people acknowledge their differences. No man is an island. I guess it's worth noting, and the way in which I in my day-to-day life go about being myself, I hope will open up spaces for other people to be themselves as well. So I don't have any kind of experience of per se of being a religious believer in an antipathetic space, but I do have this kind of notion that the way in which we express our leadership is often by being who we are and allowing other people to be who they are too, even if the public perception might be that what have a gay man and a practicing Muslim got to say to each other, and actually it seems we have a lot in common to share.
I think that is very right, and it does actually serve to underline a number of things. You'd imagine if there had been, as there would be today, a woman in their midst, although actually the women have their own barracks these days, but they're as welcome and as tough in the US Marine Corps as anywhere else. I think in this instance, it does actually reveal, what happens when young people are for however they've arrived at it. It's not to point a finger at them, to put them up on a pedestal, or even to knock them off one either. But when they are ill-informed, the word sometimes used is ignorant, but that they're ill-informed, that they have accepted certain things which people older than them, as they've been brought up in the society around them, with all the ills of that society. I think Stephen Lawrence, only 3 decades ago, and they Met still can't get it right. If you provide people with more information in a safe way, often by them finding out by example or by questioning why they think a certain way, then you can move mountains. And I think it's less so in this country, but I can understand in America, even back then, that Muslim men and women, particularly those which joined the military, were often not understood in terms of their background, their own sort of their own faith, the requirements that placed on them, and often the military, particularly at a more senior perspective, not actually really understanding it themselves and not making the right sort of circumstances. You can go aboard a Royal Navy warship today, and don't be surprised if you see a sailor wearing a turban. It's and why not? It's still got a cap badge on it, and it's probably a dark blue turban. But and I wouldn't think twice about it. Just as if you look at most of the paintings of Nelson on board HMS Victory during the Battle of Trafalgar, after he's been wounded, and there are lots of class paintings there lying there, you will see that there are people of color, people of Afro-Caribbean background, of Asian background, of Middle Eastern background. They're in that picture. We got it wrong later, but in that time, we didn't care where our sailors came from. What we wanted were people, and yes, they were press ganged occasionally, who would actually make part of a good team. And so it comes back to that. It's all about teamwork, and learning how to be a member of a good team is to accept those who are different amongst you, to understand about their difference so that you give them some respect and understanding for it. That makes you a better person, and it binds you all together. Difference is great, in my book.
Awesome.
And what a dull world it would be without, right? If we were all the same.
It would be pretty boring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, completely.
But we've all got a lot of work to do. And it's easy for me as a sort of as a relatively privileged white man, sat here. We've all had our difficulties and challenges in life, our loves, our losses, and so on. But the situation for me will undoubtedly be, without patronizing you in any way, have been far easier for me than it will have been for either of you and many of those whom you work for. I can remember, so I don't know if you know Lady Phil. So Lady Phil sort of helped set up UK Black Pride, and I know and have worked with in the past, and who I learnt a lot from. She heads up an organisation called Kaleidoscope now, and I think is still involved with the UK Black Pride. She and I have had a discussion about this, and how shamingly there is a lot of racism within our own LGBT community just here in London, and it embarrasses me. I've been to an event which she sort of led on this, and it was a very interesting one. There is still work to be done, that
completely, and it feels to me, it feels to me as if there's an empathy gap, right? So the discrimination that we might face, we struggle to extrapolate from that to understand other people's struggles, and that is a real failing, frankly. So finding ways that we can connect with each other, finding those spaces which are in which difference thrives, strikes me as one of the things that we can do as citizens, as modern citizens, trying to work out what our role is in this society. And it seems odd in some ways to think about the inspection as something which would spark those kind of thoughts, because it's very much a film about a relationship between a mother and son, and particularly particularly African American and queer perspective on things. But doesn't it just open up all sorts of possibilities in terms of thinking about the way in which we would like to operate within a society now? So I think it's more credit to the film.
Get it into schools. Get a viewing. I don't know, LGBT History Month or whatever. Run up to Pride Month. Get it into films at the right level, and then have a facilitated discussion at the end. That would be, such as we've been having. I think that would be really powerful. I think, it would be great if. And I'm no longer involved with Pride in London. I used to be the community engagement director, but that was 5 years ago now. And I'd love to see a film like this and the festival, which forms part of Pride in London. I'd like to see, it'd be nice if UK Black Pride could get a screening as part of their own, celebration of all things Pride for their community.
Yeah. You'll be pleased to hear, Patrick, I've just started on the community panel, a new community panel for Pride in London. So
fabulous.
Yeah, so we'll see what we can do.
The community advisory board, I used to have to battle my fellow directors into understanding the importance of it. Now, we didn't quite get it right, but when we originally set it up back in early 2013, we got about 75 groups together at the Law Society, and out of that, we evolved that. Pride probably, my colleagues probably didn't give it the autonomy, the secretarial support, the closely listening ear that it deserved. But it was it was a step in the right direction, and I'm really delighted to hear that it's now back up and running. Do you know Chris, who's the executive director? Chris basically took over from me on that particular position, was now the executive director, and I saw him in a Met Police, thing recently, hosted by the commissioner himself, still unable to accept that there is institutionalized homophobia, let alone institutionalized racism. Baroness sort of Lawrence had it entirely right there after all this time. And he had, sorry, I'm distracting, but
no.
All right,
he had a number of senior officers there who were commanders. So, and so the next down below being an assistant commissioner, and you could see that they weren't all agreeing with his line and were a little bit embarrassed. So we've got to engage, and we've got to see, change there. But delighted to hear the new board.
But it is important to think about the institutions, right? So, as a Londoner, I think it's important that our police service responds to the people that it's seeking to serve. And so I think there are lessons from the inspection, but there are also just the implications of the ways in which the Marines operated then, that could be important lessons for Commissioner Rowley now. I mean, to me,
I hope so. I hope he listens to them, because at the moment he's not giving me the best impression that he is as much as he needs to. Just of interest, they have set up a new training program for their more senior people. So that's sergeants and inspectors upwards, focusing on both the sort of the LGBT side of things, but also within the Black, Asian, Afro-Caribbean communities. I always skate around a little bit because I know people prefer different terminology, and I want to not give offense to anyone. So I've actually become one of their trainers. Hasn't started yet. I've had my induction, and so I'll sit in a number of panels whereby I'll give a 15-minute spiel, and I'll be focusing on the importance of their understanding how they engage properly with, in this particular instance, the LGBT plus community.
So Patrick, there's something we should talk about, because I did exactly, well, not exactly that, but something very similar to that at Bramshill 10, 15 years ago. So there are ways in which some of these things come back round.
They will be looking for new. They'll be looking for new people to join. I'd be very happy to meet over a cold beer or a warm glass of wine or a coffee or whatever sometime, and just as our U.S. Marine Corps men and women would say, chew the fat.
Absolutely, cool. Let's do that.
This has been really awesome, and we've got so many gems, and I really appreciate all that you've been able to drop. This has been a phenomenal conversation. You've brought so much information about the military, the Navy. Rob, you've brought so much information about Black queerness, elevation, and just Black culture, and the fact that you've got this new role that you're doing now, which I'm very happy for you. And thank you very much for making the time. Thank you everyone else for listening, streaming, watching on YouTube. This has been a great episode of the Real Happy Hour podcast. Thank you all very much.